story begins with a knock on the protagonist's apartment door. A man introduces himself as an agent from the Transmission Investigation Division of the Superpower Control Bureau. He asks if the protagonist is Han Sung-hyun, to which he replies affirmatively, attempting to explain himself further. However, before he can finish, the man cuts him off, stating that his identity is confirmed and instructing him to report to the Superpower Control Bureau if he awakens. The brief exchange with an outsider, the first in 6 months, concludes, meaning Sung-hyun won't have to open the front door again for another half a year. He grabs some food but notices the expiration date has passed. It's been 2 years since Sung-hyun last ventured outside. He lives as a recluse, and while some might label him as pathetic or weak-willed, he views himself as a victim of a cruel world. The news reports that fire authorities are battling a blaze in a shopping area, and the suspected arsonist is believed to be an awakened individual who committed a random crime before being transported to another world. This report stirs Sung-hyun's worry about awakening. One day, humanity began randomly developing mysterious abilities, known as superpowers. Upon awakening, an individual is forcibly transported to another world within 24 hours. If certain conditions are met, they can return to Earth, but only a few manage to survive and come back. This grim reality led many awakened to commit crimes in despair before their inevitable transportation. 2 years ago, Sung-hyun lost his family and his leg to one of these awakened crimes, and with it, he lost the will to face the world. Although he exercises his legs every day, he stops after reaching a certain number of repetitions, questioning why he bothers when it seems to have no effect. He considers himself pathetic. He also wonders why stepping outside his door fills him with panic. If only he had more courage, would things have turned out differently? He muses that if he could leave his room and go anywhere, any place would be better than where he is now. Suddenly, a system notification appears before him. It alerts him that a cache system is connecting. It also informs him that he is awakening a unique skill, sending him into a panic as he wonders if he's truly awakening. The system reveals his unique skill, Avatar, and begins a countdown, displaying a 24-hour timer until his transportation to another world. In shock, Sung-hyun questions if this is real, thinking it must be some kind of joke. But the system warns him that if he does not enter the transport field within the time limit, he will be forcibly taken. In a panic, he rushes to his closet, recalling that it takes at least a year to return to Earth, as time in the other world moves 10 times slower. This means he must survive for 10 years in another world to come back. Anxiety overwhelms him as he wonders if survival is even possible. With only 3 minutes remaining, Sung-hyun approached the transport field on trembling legs, clutching his travel essentials. Fear gripped him as he prepared to step into the field, but just as he was about to put one foot forward, he stopped and collapsed to the ground, overwhelmed with panic. He thought it was impossible. He couldn't even go outside on Earth. How could he possibly survive in another world without power or skills? His mind raced until he suddenly remembered something. Realizing that he had just acquired a skill, he questioned himself, did he really have superpowers? Determined to find out, he shouted, "Activate Avatar skill!" To his astonishment, another version of himself materialized in front of him. Shocked but certain it was him, Sung-hyun felt a sharp pain in his head, disoriented by the sight of 2 versions of his own face. He turned away from his avatar and removed his helmet, confirming that they were sharing the same vision. Covering his mouth, Sung-hyun quickly realized that moving separately from his avatar was nauseating. Trying to move simultaneously was even worse, making him feel like he was going to vomit. The system flashed another warning. Only 1 minute remained until transport. If he didn't step into the field, he would be forcibly taken. Leaning his head against his avatar, Sung-hyun muttered in frustration. Even with an avatar, it felt useless. He wondered why his superpower had to be as useless as he felt, but then, as he looked at his emotionless avatar, an idea struck him. If only someone could go in his place. He stared at the avatar, and with a burst of hope, he made it enter the transport field instead. As the system began processing the transport, Sung-hyun closed his eyes, praying that it would accept his avatar. The field brightened, and the system confirmed the initiation of transport. Sung-hyun collapsed to the floor in relief. His plan had worked. The system had recognized the avatar as him. The system announced that his avatar had been successfully transported to the Alterica dimension. Song Hyun looked at his hands in confusion, wondering why he was still there when he had sent his avatar. The system then revealed that he could return to Earth through the return option in the karma shop, and that he could earn karma during his adventures. At that moment, he noticed that his current karma was 0. But then, a surge of pain hit him, and he realized he wasn't actually in the other world. He was just sharing the avatar's sight. Dizzy, he dismissed the avatar and was snapped back to Earth. Overcome with nausea, Song Hyun rushed to the bathroom and vomited into the sink. After throwing up, he felt slightly better. At least he had avoided the transport. He summoned his avatar once more inside, feeling hopeless. What could he possibly do with such a useless power? Suddenly, the system congratulated him for achieving a great feat, returning to Earth on his own without using the karma shop. Shocked, Song Hyun stared at the notification as the system revealed that he had earned a special reward, a dimensional transport field. This would allow him to travel once per day to a previously visited location via the transport field. He stood there, stunned, as the system also showed that his karma had increased significantly. And so, Song Hyun became the awakened who returned to Earth in the shortest time ever. The system then displayed his current karma balance, 1,910,213. Song Hyun couldn't believe it, almost 2 million karma. He wondered if he had gained that much just by dismissing the avatar. Realizing that nearly 10 years' worth of karma had accumulated in an instant since returning to Earth cost only 1 million. Karma is earned based on the impact one has in the other world and is accumulated through good deeds, evil deeds, killing, labor, and other actions. It can also be used to strengthen skills or return to Earth. Staring at his balance, Song Hyun questioned whether this was a glitch and worried about the possibility of having to give it back later. However, he reassured himself that he hadn't done anything wrong on purpose. Since he was already on Earth, returning seemed pointless. He then noticed the strengthened status option and wondered what it entailed. Clicking it, he discovered an option to enhance his health, specifically a recoverability enhancement that cost 10,000 karma. Surprised, he decided to try it. Seconds after activating the enhancement, he could feel his damaged leg healing. The sensation returned, and he realized that the injury, which had long been a reminder of his tragic farewell to his family, was mending. The system notified him that his recoverability had surpassed the threshold, granting him a new skill, Super Recovery, with enhanced healing effects. Later that night, Song Hyun was effortlessly exercising his legs with the leg machine. Pouring karma into healing had not only restored his leg but also made him incredibly strong. Excited by his newfound strength, he noticed that he still had plenty of karma left. He wondered what he should use it on next. His eyes were drawn to the Strengthen Unique Skill option in the store, which offered the Strength skill for 300,000 karma. Despite not knowing its exact effects, he clicked it, curious about what would happen if he strengthened his avatar skill as well. After showering, Song Hyun studied his avatar closely. It looked noticeably more robust. His avatar even commented, telling him that he looked fit himself, asking if he'd been working out. Song Hyun responded that it was the result of consistent effort. Since awakening his avatar skill, his consciousness had split into two, allowing him to move freely. Through strengthening the unique skill, he gained a new ability, Mind Hub, which filtered stimuli and emotions, letting only the desired information reach him. Realizing this meant he would no longer experience dimension sickness, and that he wouldn't feel pain if his avatar got hurt. Song Hyun playfully hit his avatar in celebration. Sitting down on his sofa, he was filled with excitement. He could now adventure through another world from the comfort of his warm room. Controlling his avatars like playing a game. In fact, he now had 2 avatars, essentially tripling his presence in the other world. He began to wonder if gaining more avatars was possible as he grew stronger, though managing them all could get confusing. Deciding that he couldn't keep calling them all avatars, Song Hyun set his mind to naming them. Although he admitted to being terrible at naming things, he took the task seriously. Glancing at a food package on the table, he turned to his first avatar and declared that its name would be Hands, noting its individual trait of magic affinity. For his second avatar, he chose the name Hands due to its trait of durability. Looking at their abilities, magic affinity and durability, Song Hyun thought they seemed somewhat mediocre. But he knew this was only the beginning. and now it was time to face the big main quests. Song-hyun then told his avatars that it was time to venture into the outside world. Hans stepped onto the transport field while Hans grabbed a year's worth of trash. As Hans carried the trash out, Hans pinched his nose from the stench. Moments later, Hans was transported to the other world while Hans stepped outside. Blinking against the bright sunlight, Hans was pleased to realize he felt no anxiety at all. Thanks to the Mind Hub skill working perfectly, Sung-hyun, from his original body, saw that Hans had arrived safely in the other world. There, it was already night. Hans looked around the peaceful-looking forest and mused about how quiet it seemed, until a pair of bright eyes peeked out from a nearby bush. A panther emerged, catching Hans by surprise. It lunged at him with its mouth wide open, but Hans calmly drew his sword and held it steady, waiting for the panther to get closer. He blocked its attack with the sheath of his sword, commenting on the annoyance of the situation as he watched the panther's saliva drip onto the blade. With a quick jump backward, Hans unsheathed his sword, confirming that he didn't feel fear or pain even in this dangerous scenario. To him, it felt just like playing a game. He activated his magic infusion and stabs the panther, sending its blood splattering onto the ground. Though he managed to kill it easily, he sighed while examining his sword, knowing he was still weak. He realized that staying in the forest was risky. If he encountered another monster, he might not be so lucky. Noticing a village in the distance, Hans decided to head toward it. As he arrived, the village chief, Malcolm, warmly welcomed him, referring to him as a traveler. Malcolm expressed admiration for Hans' bravery, noting that surviving the monster-infested forest path at night was impressive. Hans laughed and downplayed the compliment, admitting he was in pretty bad shape and asked if he could impose on the village for the night. Malcolm agreed immediately, saying they must help one another, which gave Hans a sense of relief. He thanked Malcolm as they walked together, with Malcolm commenting on Hans' unusual clothes and gear, asking if he came from far away. Hans laughed awkwardly, explaining that he had been wandering, collecting things here and there. Malcolm nodded in understanding, adding that it had been a while since they'd seen an outsider, and suggested they share a drink at the village tavern. After drinking at the tavern, Hans headed to his accommodation. He cleaned up and lay on the bed, thinking about how kind the village was for offering him a room and a drink. It had been so long since he had enjoyed the company of others. His body began to feel tired, and he allowed himself to drift off to sleep, unaware that someone had quietly entered his room. Meanwhile, back on Earth, in his original body, Sung-hyun was enjoying a beer, exclaiming how great it was to travel to another world while relaxing at home and eating chicken. He glanced at Heinz, who was busy with strength training, using his durability skill to its full advantage. Sung-hyun felt a bit guilty watching Heinz work so hard, but knew it was necessary to prepare for any potential danger. He told Heinz that as hard as his duplicates were working, it was important to understand how the other world operated. Deciding to act as the perfect commander, he opened his laptop to check on things. However, an uneasy feeling crept over him. Sung-hyun paused, wondering where this bad feeling was coming from. Suddenly, the system alerted him his avatar was dead. The notification further explained that the avatar's traits and accumulated data would be reset. Sung-hyun was stunned. He couldn't believe it. Heinz was dead. Sung-hyun knew that Heinz was in the village, which led him to suspect Malcolm. If Heinz was dead, it must have been Malcolm's doing. He wondered if the village chief had spiked his drink and realized that he had been too careless in such an unfamiliar place. But then, he felt something, making him question if he had somehow reconnected with his avatar. Back in the village, Malcolm was speaking with a long-haired man, sounding disappointed. He lamented that he had thought Heinz would be useful, but Heinz had turned out to be worthless. The man agreed. Malcolm continued, explaining that he had believed Heinz had some talent since he made it through the monster-infested forest alone. But in the end, Heinz was just an elite skeleton, as they both stared at Heinz' newly skeletal form. Moments later, Sung-hyun retrieved Heinz' body, now reduced to a skeleton. He stared at his bony hand, trying to comprehend what had happened. The system then alerted him. The species value of the entity had changed to undead, and as a result, Heinz had acquired a special skill, Corrupted Heart. Sung-hyun couldn't believe that Heinz had been transformed into an undead elite skeleton. However, the system reassured him that, thanks to the effect of the mind hub, there was no mental corruption. He looked around in confusion, trying to figure out where he was, and was shocked to see skeletons and zombies standing in line in front of him. He wondered if the entire village had been turned into undead creatures. Suddenly, the door burst open, and the man from the tavern the previous night stormed in, complaining about how long he had been stuck in the remote mountains. Sung-hyun began to wonder if all the people he had seen were actually necromancers. The man noticed him and stared, causing Sung-hyun to panic. Why was the man looking at him like that, and if it realized he could move? The man angrily shouted, demanding to know why that thing was still there, and complained that no one ever did their job right. He ordered Sung-hyun to move, but Sung-hyun resisted at first, even with the corrupted heart making him feel scared. Yet, to his surprise, his body moved on its own. Confused, he found himself walking to the back of the line, feeling a force weakly trying to control him. He realized he could resist it if he wanted to, but decided to play along for now. As he stood in line, the man grumbled about how he always had to check everything. Complaining that Malcolm was far too picky, he eventually turned and left the room. Sung-hyun, now alone, gripped his skeletal fist, contemplating what had just happened. The power the man had used felt strangely familiar. It was the same kind of power Sung-hyun had used to control his undead body. He speculated that perhaps, because of Hyun's magic affinity trait, he now understood the mechanics of that power and wondered if he could control other undead as well. A week later, Sung-hyun was still in the room of the undead, but he had finally managed to control another, undead creature. Taking a deep breath to focus, he used his power to command the skeleton in front of him to stand up, which it did, albeit clumsily. Frustration welled up inside him. He could only control one undead at a time, and their movements were slow and awkward. He wondered if this was the limit of an elite skeleton. Suddenly, he heard a squeaking sound and noticed a rat biting his ankle. He immediately grabbed it in anger. It had been scratching at his heels all week. The rat was small but incredibly fast. That gave him an idea. Realizing that while it wasn't human, it was still a living thing, Sung-hyun decided to experiment. He released a small amount of power through his finger and pierced the rat. It squeaked loudly in pain and died instantly. Sung-hyun quickly controlled it, turning it into an undead creature. To his excitement, the rat moved. He named the rat Alfred and gave it a command, go. With a grin, he thought about its new mission, Operation Rats, Hear the Night mission. Moments later, Sung-hyun ordered Alfred to stop as he saw the man who was always complaining, standing in front of the door, swearing that he would deal with the old man, Malcolm, personally. Sung-hyun watched as the man unlocked the padlock, wondering what could be inside the other warehouse. Were there more undead? As the man entered the room, Sung-hyun made Alfred follow him. But before the rat could cross the threshold, Sung-hyun felt a powerful force emanating from inside. Even with the mind hub dulling his emotions, the danger was palpable. He knew instinctively that getting closer would be risky. A moment later, the man exited the room, and Sung-hyun had Alfred follow again. The man met with another individual, who asked when the maturation would be complete, grumbling that he felt like he was losing years of his life with every visit. The first man replied that it shouldn't be much longer, and the master had been there every day. The other man laughed, commenting on the absurdity of standing guard in a place so heavily protected by barriers that no one could possibly sneak in. After hearing this, Sung-hyun directed Alfred to withdraw, mentally thanking the men for the valuable information. He surmised that what he had sensed earlier was likely a fragment of the immortal king. He then ordered Alfred to continue scouting, wondering where he could gather more intel and where the village chief might be. Suddenly, a sharp force pierced Alfred, killing him instantly. Malcolm approached and inspected Alfred's corpse, muttering that it was just a rat. Sung-hyun wondered if Malcolm had caught on to him. However, Malcolm seemed puzzled, remarking that, while the rat's body was filled with dark energy, he couldn't sense any dark magic controlling it. He mused aloud that it might have naturally formed from dark energy, and asked the two men if Sephi was on warehouse duty, startling both of them. As Malcolm walked away, Sung-hyun silently swore to Alfred that he would avenge him, asking the rat's spirit to watch over him. The following morning, the man angrily kicked open the warehouse door, yelling about how ridiculous it was that a rat had managed to get in. He demanded that the undead line up properly, cursing at them for their incompetence. He stormed over to the undead, punching one of them while ordering them to stand straight. As he crouched down, he suddenly remembered the undead he had just struck. Grabbing the undead by the head, he sneered, recognizing it as the man who had defied him. Taunting the undead, he mockingly asked if it remembered claiming that no one would harm its family, reminding it that he had ripped out its tongue. Letting go of the undead, the man circled around, boasting that hunting down the villagers one by one had been far more entertaining. The undead man on the ground stirred and slowly stood up. The man, preoccupied with teasing the other undead, didn't notice. He was busy asking if any of the other houses had children when the undead man lunged at him from behind, grabbing his shoulder and biting into his neck. The man fell to the ground in shock, clutching his neck in pain, and demanded to know what was happening. He ordered the undead to stop, but the undead man kept advancing. Panicking, the man tried to cast magic, but before he could finish, the undead woman grabbed him from behind, covering his mouth. His panic turned to terror as he saw the other undead shambling closer. He screamed in fear as the undead swarmed him, biting into him with fury. Meanwhile, Hans Hu watching from behind, guiding the undead. He thought to himself that this was only the beginning. The victim's revenge had just begun. Meanwhile, Heinz stood at the entrance of the village, telling the guards that his brother was inside. The guards shouted back that his brother had already left and angrily asked Heinz how they could allow outsiders in so recklessly. Heinz, undeterred, insisted they at least let him meet the village chief. Just then, Malcolm appeared, asking the guards what the commotion was about, and introduced himself as the village chief. Heinz greeted Malcolm, but Malcolm, surprised to see his face, asked who he was. Heinz explained that he was Hans's twin brother and believed Hans was still in the village. At the same time, Song Hyun, controlling Hans's body, entered the next warehouse, thinking how convenient it was to have two bodies, especially with Heinz distracting Malcolm. This allowed him to sneak into the warehouse unnoticed. Inside, he saw the Immortal King's fragment floating in the center of the room. It seemed to be absorbing dark energy from the surrounding undead, but on closer inspection, he realized it was more like it was resonating, filling in its missing parts. He noticed that all the undead in the room looked incredibly strong, leading him to conclude that this warehouse housed defective goods. Angered by the fragment, he grabbed it, feeling unpleasant, and pulled it toward him. With a dark thought, he decided it was time to taste some of those defective goods. He pushed the fragment inside Hans's body, while outside, Heinz continued to chat brightly with Malcolm. Heinz explained that, as twins, they always knew where the other was. Malcolm laughed, but expressed disbelief, finding it hard to accept. Suddenly, a loud scream echoed through the village and the ground shook violently. Malcolm instantly realized something was wrong with the fragment. He transformed into a dark spirit and rushed toward the village center, ordering the guards to kill Heinz. The guards quickly aimed their spears, but to their confusion, Heinz disappeared, leaving them asking each other where he had gone. Meanwhile, inside the warehouse, having merged the fragment with Hans's body, began hearing voices in his head. They whispered that the more death filled the world, the stronger he would become, and they repeated over and over, "Kill them all." Holding his head, Hans struggled as waves of negative emotions flooded in. Even though his mind hub skill was filtering them, the intensity was overwhelming. He screamed in pain as the power of the Immortal King's fragment surged through his body, shouting to no one in particular if anyone could possibly endure this and remain sane. The immense power caused the warehouse to explode, and moments later, Hans emerged from the wreckage. The system notified him that his entity had met the conditions for growth. His new entity information displayed Immortal Mage, Demelik, with his level increased, thanks to the power of the Immortal King's fragment, level 3/1. Additionally, he gained a special skill, Evil Wisdom, which granted absolute understanding and talent in dark magic. Meanwhile, back in the defective goods warehouse, a man, frustrated with his assignment, grumbled about how Zeffy couldn't even handle a single zombie rat. And now the problem had become his. Malcolm then shouts at the man through telepathically, whom he called Huyin, calling him an idiot. Huyin immediately responded, reporting that nothing was wrong, but Malcolm cut him off, ordering him to check the fragment and contact Zeffy. Huyin obeyed and shouted for Zeffy to check the fragment, but no one answered. Growing impatient, Huyin called again, asking if Zeffy could hear him. Just then, someone appeared in the middle of the room, surprising Hu Yin, who assumed it was Zeffy and asked why he hadn't responded. Suddenly, the undead rushed at Hu Yin, trying to grab him. The figure greeted Hu Yin, commenting on the lovely weather today. Shocked, Hu Yin realized it was impossible. How could this figure be talking? When one of the undead managed to grab Hu Yin, he became enraged and unleashed his power, throwing it at the undead and shouting for them to get away from him. But before he could do more, the door collapsed, pinning him down. The undead figure emerged with him, mockingly saying it hurt to be ignored. Hans, now fully in control of his dark power, released a small amount of dark energy into his palm. He thought to himself that, thanks to the evil wisdom skill, he instinctively understood how to wield dark magic just by observing it in action. Hans detonated the warehouse to break through the barrier and called his undead forces to leave no one alive in the village. However, his confidence wavered when he saw that the undead were being destroyed with ease, sending him into a panic. He couldn't understand what was happening. Malcolm, furious, was the one eliminating the undead. He questioned whether Hans had indeed become an elite skeleton and how he managed to acquire the immortal king's fragment. As Hans observed Malcolm's true form, the reversing oath, Elder Marcos Chakali, he remained calm, greeting Malcolm as if they had met before, subtly reminding him of their shared past. He then revealed the immortal king's fragment embedded in his body, explaining how he had lost his heart and simply replaced it with the powerful artifact from the warehouse. Malcolm's rage intensified as he expressed disbelief that such a lowly body could merge with the fragment. Activating his death magic, Malcolm unleashed a powerful attack. He tried to dodge, but the blast struck his shoulder, causing his arm to fall off. Despite this, he remained nonchalant, remarking on the impoliteness of being attacked mid-conversation. Malcolm ranted about how they had spent an entire year and countless resources on the maturation process, only for it to culminate in the creation of a demolic. He launched multiple attacks, but he quickly summoned his throne of darkness, successfully blocking the assaults. He noticed that the defense was powerful, though it felt like placing a high-level enchantment on a novice weapon. With a tone of defiance, he expressed his confidence in making the power work, taunting Malcolm for his failure. Malcolm retaliated with another powerful skill, intending to tear his. However, Hans' defense absorbed the attacks, leaving him unscathed. Growing irritated, he criticized Malcolm's habit of announcing every spell, mentioning that it was time for revenge. Malcolm, confused, wondered if he had infiltrated the village from the start and questioned whether he knew someone there. When he attempted a surprise attack, Malcolm blocked it just in time with his shield. At this point, Malcolm realized that he was adapting to dark magic at an alarming rate, likely due to the power of the fragment. Knowing he couldn't afford to waste more time, Malcolm prepared to use his most dangerous skill. Meanwhile, the necromancers in the village struggled against the undead, but suddenly, one screamed as his soul was drained from his body. The others soon followed, collapsing as their souls floated away. Hans observed this and realized that Malcolm was consuming the necromancer's souls. After draining their life force, Malcolm placed the crown of the Broken One on his head, a relic tied to the resting place of the dead. This frustrated Hans, as he began to understand that Malcolm was using the souls as payment for greater power. Malcolm gathered dark energy in his hands, preparing another attack. He believed that despite Hans' endurance, the power of the fragment wouldn't be enough to save him. Just as Malcolm was about to unleash his next move, he flinched, struck in the heart by a precise attack. Hans had retaliated, hitting Malcolm with his own death magic. Malcolm fell to his knees, weakened and stunned by the turn of events. Hans, standing over him, made it clear that the battle was over and sarcastically thanked Malcolm for teaching him about dark magic. In disbelief, Malcolm lamented the pointlessness of it all before succumbing to his wounds. As Malcolm lay dying, Hans looked to the sky and reflected on how he had fulfilled his promise to avenge Alfred.